Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Marcello Cordovani of Vitor, Visit Italy on the Road, Italy with Italians. And welcome to our 7th episode. It's already the 7th episode of our series. Let's talk about Italy. And I thank you all who are live now, and to all of you who will watch this episode later on. Okay, this is Holy Friday for Christians. Okay, so we will also talk about Jesus Christ, but we will talk about him from the Roman point of view. So we'll talk about it at the end of our tale about Tiberius. Okay, so let's start with, as usual, with an update about the situation here in Italy. Well, this is an aerial view of a vaccination facility. Probably it's Fiumicino Airport in Rome. We had some problems. Obviously, we had some problems at the beginning. But I was talking with a Canadian friend the other day, and he told me a story that I told him, you're living in Italy, you're not living in Canada. It seems that vaccination started very slowly in many countries. In Europe, for sure. We had some logistic problems. Vaccines were not available in the numbers that we expected. There's a huge quarrel with one producer, in particular AstraZeneca, because it's not delivering the number of doses that they planned to deliver. So, but at the end of it, we are getting more vaccines, more shots from other companies, and they are starting, the government and the European Union are starting to set up some real plans, okay, about how every range of age is going to be vaccinated. I mean, the range between 50 and 60. And today, for the first day, I heard about a date. So hopefully, me and my wife and my friends who are my age, we are going to be vaccinated in June. So this is also very, very important for us, because this means that we will be able to resume our activity by September. But I will talk about it later on. Well, this is a very nice picture. I like it very much since the moment I saw it. So you see this guy on the right, sitting beside the extinguisher, talking with a lady. He's our president, our prime minister, Mr. Mario Draghi, and his wife. And he is sitting there as a normal guy. I mean, we are all used to see people getting ahead, politicians, ministers getting ahead, and he's setting a very, very smart example. He's sitting in line. The two guys in front of him are probably his guards, his bodyguards. And he's just waiting his turn, and this is really encouraging, because it says that we will get it. We will get the shots by the time we are in line for that. And if the prime minister is not getting ahead because of his office, so this is very encouraging. Well, another encouraging piece of news for people who plan to visit Venice, not on a cruise, on a ship. This is a picture which I don't like. I like the former one, but I don't like this one because This shows what happened until 1 year ago, until the start of the pandemic in Venice. This is a huge ship, and it's not even one of the biggest in the world, but it's a huge cruise ship which was allowed to navigate in the channel of the Giudecca in Venice. Here I put a map. Okay, you can see a map, and here you can see that the green is the very center of Venice, and you see that the channel from San Marco to going around is La Giudecca. Okay, so the ships got into the lagoon and went just in front of San Marco. Obviously, the great canal, which you see is meandering through Venice, is too small. But the canal, the Giudecca Canal, is quite large, and so the cruise ships were allowed to move through it, to sail through it, and but when the unfortunate incident of Costa Concordia happened at Isola del Giglio, everybody understood that this was too dangerous. So they started to think about a possible solution, and they are working on it. Probably they will have the ships dock outside the lagoon, and then have some motorboats sail through the lagoon to San Marco. That's the most probable solution right now. But in the meantime, there's a decree by the government which says that the ships are not allowed when they will come back, because no ships are coming to Venice right now. But when they will come back, which will probably happen by the end of the year, they will not be allowed to sail through the Giudecca. You know, when you see Piazzale Roma is the terminal of the railway station, and beside that there's the docking station right now for the ships, which used to be the docking station, and probably you're wondering why the ships would have to pass through the Giudecca. First of all, for the scenery, and also for the fact that some of the sea bottom, it's a lagoon, so it's quite shallow. The waters are quite shallow. So it was they will have to dig away if they allowed the ships to come into the lagoon, which probably they will not. They would have to dig into shallow waters. So this is pretty good news. Okay, before we start with Tiberius, let me give you an update about our activity. As I told you in the last episodes, and also the episodes before, we will resume our activities by September the 1st. The reason is that the vaccination program will be complete only by the end of August, not earlier. Even if there is a speed up in the program, but we are quite confident that by the beginning of September, the vast majority, 70-80% of adult population will be vaccinated. So we are starting again in full safety. We don't want to risk your health, and the situation is still too risky, and we prefer to hold on. And probably we will also organize a couple of tours, guided tours in September and October. And for this, I will update you in the near future. The problem is also that not many hotels are open and not many service providers are still open right now. They will probably open right after Easter. There's also because we'll be on a lockdown until April the 20th. So they are not opening up because they would open up, but with no customers. So I think that they will be running and they will be able to, people will get back to work by April the 20th. So we will be able to make quotes and prices by that time. But please stay tuned on our website and on our Facebook page. We communicate through this Facebook page. And we will let you know as soon as possible, and also about the dates of the possible guided tours. Okay, that's all for the update, and a newsletter will probably follow in the next week. So I invite you to subscribe our newsletter at www.vitor.it or www.vitoritalytours.com. Okay, Tiberius. Well, I didn't expect to have such a response from the crowd saying, "Marcello, are you nuts? Well, get back to school." That was one comment which was very funny. Get back to school, Marcello. Tiberius was not the first emperor, but you will discover why. Obviously, I was provocative. It was a title to arouse your attention, your curiosity also. How can Marcello, who told us about the history of Rome for 6 episodes right now, and now how can he say that? It's quite disconcerting. So please follow my explanation and my tale, and you will understand why I say that Tiberius was the first emperor. Obviously, he was the first emperor in one sense and not in an absolute sense, but you will understand why. Okay, so let's start from Augustus. You remember Augustus died in 14 AD. Okay, and Augustus did not like Tiberius, and only after a long series of mournings, he opted for the adopted son of his wife, Livia. She had him from her first marriage, but Tiberius was really a first-order man for his merits and for the lineage. He belonged to a great Roman family, the gens Claudia, whose history was intertwined with the history of the Republic. Also, he had been a valiant soldier who did not just command the troops, but fought in the field alongside his soldiers. He was an experienced general, the architect of brilliant military campaigns in very difficult territories, like Germania, like Pannonia, like Dalmatia. And also Tiberius had shown that he could put the obedience to his prince before his dearest feelings. Augustus had forced him to repudiate his wife, Vipsania, whom he loved so much, and who was also pregnant of him. And he had to marry Augustus' daughter, the unscrupulous and corrupt Giulia, a very unfortunate and sad marriage. But he was a free, a proud, and a very severe man. And some years before, the Senate, upon Augustus' recommendation, of course, had given him the powers that allowed him to rule the Roman world. If you go back to the previous episodes, you remember it was the tribunicia potestas, the power of the tribunes, and the imperium, the power over the legions. And Octavian had adopted him. So Tiberius had taken the name of Tiberius Julius Caesar Augustus. And the news of Augustus' death in the city of Nola in Campania on August 19th in 14 AD, they spread immediately along with the announcement that Tiberius had taken his place in the imperial family, as he was his main heir. And here you can see the mausoleum of Augustus. And on the right, obviously, is a reconstruction. On the left, it has been opened 1 month ago to visitors. It's not really completely restored, but it's you can get into it, so you can see how huge, how massive it is. By the way, on the top of that picture, you can see that. Let me see if I can show it to you. Okay, the laser pointer here. This is the building where the Ara Pacis is. You remember the Ara Pacis, the altar of the peace that Augustus had erected in 1312 BC. Okay, to celebrate the peace that he had given the empire. And so the two buildings are very close. The mausoleum is just on the other side of the road. Okay, so it can be visited, and obviously now it's not open because of the pandemic, but it will open soon when other museums will open. And so back to the death of Augustus. We have the words of the greatest historian of those times. It is Tacitus, and these words are really dazzling. He writes, "Meanwhile, in Rome, consuls, senators, equites precipitately became servile. The more distinguished they were, the greater their urgency and insincerity. They must show neither satisfaction at the death of one ruler, nor gloom at the ascent of another. So their features are carefully arranged in a blend of tears and smiles, mourning and flattery." So, back to the title. Why do I say that Tiberius was the first emperor? Historians have many possible questions to answers to this question. The first emperor was, technically and formally speaking, well, we have to go way back. It was Scipio at the end of the 3rd century. Remember the Punic Wars? Scipio was the general who defeated Hannibal. And yes, he was her first emperor because he held the imperium. The imperium is the military command. And so many leaders after him, Caesar, and obviously Augustus, who first used this word beyond its military meaning. But Augustus, as we saw last time, he was primarily the princeps, the primus inter pares. And he was very careful not to show his absolute power. So when I say that Tiberius was the first emperor, I mean it in the very way that we use this word today, the absolute ruler of the state, an office clearly recognized by his subject. He was the emperor for all the citizens, all the subjects of the empire, okay? And Augustus obviously was the first emperor de facto, but Tiberius was the first de jure. Formally, the Republic with its magistrates, the Senate and the popular assemblies, remained alive. Senators and members of senatorial families still occupied the offices of the Republican tradition. When Augustus died, the ambiguity of the situation, it arose, with the Republic still formally existing, and the Senate still endowed with decisive power. And this ambiguity was now evident. And it marked the history of the next 2 centuries of the empire. On one side, the recurrent attempt by the Senate to escape the emperor's rule, and on the other, the growing tendency to transform the principality into a real hereditary monarchy. And let's not forget a third and even a fourth fundamental protagonist, the legions of the provinces and the Praetorian Guard in Rome. The ambiguous nature of the principality, it was actually a monarchical power to all effects, disguised in republican forms, and officially subject to the control of the Senate and other magistratures, became clear during the first session of the Senate. Tiberius declared that he could not receive the moral and political legacy of such an immense figure like the one of the prince who had just died. He could not accept the immense power that Augustus had. He thus asked to exonerate from this office, to restore the Republic, and he offered to govern together with the Senate. But the Senate begged him to stay, and Tiberius eventually accepted to stay in power, as if forced by the prayers of the Senate. So, with this mandate, the senators gave Tiberius the absolute power that he already had, and took the mask of that Augustus had off the face of Tiberius. Now, it was the Senate who declared that they were living under a monarchy. Many ancient authors have considered him a hypocrite, a liar, and many modern historians have followed them in this judgment. The hypocrisy was twofold, they said. Tiberius in showing the desire not to be emperor, and senators in pretending not to understand that the Republic existed only in name now, that the emperor was not a simple magistrate, that Tiberius had been clearly indicated by Augustus as the heir to his power. So they were living in a monarchy now. However, it is possible also that Tiberius' uncertainties were sincere. There was something republican about his soul. Other modern historians have justified his behavior. Like all uncertain men, full of doubts, he may have felt very small in comparison with his great predecessor, not up to such a heavy task that could have annihilated him. As we have seen now, the succession to Augustus was very smooth, but behind that apparent tranquility, there was a huge problem, which will persist in the following centuries until the end of the empire. To understand it, we must clarify one point right now. The Caesarian regime and the monarchies of medieval and modern Europe are not the same thing. Why? Because in the Middle Ages, and even until the French Revolution, the European kings were regarded as the owners of their kingdom. The kingdom passed from hand to hand as an inheritance, a family good. This hereditary conception was not entirely absent in the Roman rule, but the general sentiment was that the emperor ruled as a delegate of the collectivity, not as an owner. It was clearly a fiction because the community had no means of expressing its will in this regard, and also because the consent of the community was regularly manifested after the event. The game was over and the successor had already ascended the throne. So consent was a fiction, but it was a powerful fiction. This fiction reassured the Romans. After all, even if the facts proved otherwise, the throne, and thus the state, did not belong to an individual or his family. This fiction made the Romans feel as they wanted to feel, not subjects, but free citizens. It was they who delegated power. And it's a fiction, I repeat, but a fundamental one. For this reason, no written rules, constitutional rules, were ever drawn up to regulate the transfer of power from one emperor to another. And the negative consequences of this lack of rules were numerous. With the death of each emperor, the risk of a civil war was very strong. And also, the Roman emperors, while feeling like the masters of the world, they ended up living in a state of perennial precariousness. So, back to our character. When he came to power, Tiberius was 54, young man for us, but quite old for those days. And he belonged to a very important senatorial family, and he intended to govern along with the Senate, to respect as far as possible the traditional values of the Roman society. And initially he did so with concrete acts, and he rejected some extraordinary honors that had been attributed to Augustus. For example, the very important title of Father of the Fatherland. And he refused, unlike Augustus, to be venerated like a god. To a delegation of Spaniards who asked him for permission to erect a temple dedicated to him and his mother, he replied, "I know that I am human and mortal. I consider the duties I must fulfill. This is enough for me to hold this office worthily." But the relationship with the Senate did not work. The situation was very ambiguous. We can understand them. These senators, it was uncertain. It was dangerous for many Tory senators. Did not like Tiberius. Did not trust Tiberius. They were afraid to stand up and possibly pay for the consequences. And so they competed in worshipping the prince. So, in short, Tiberius asked for the cooperation of the senators and found himself regularly surrounded by servants. He understood he was not believed, and he got angrier and angrier. So, on a military level, Tiberius followed Augustus' provisions. This is the map of the empire in the age of Tiberius. You see, the yellow is the territories ruled by the Romans by 14 AD, the year of the death of Augustus. And in pink and green, we can see the additions. In green, we can see the additions, and in pink, we can see the king, the client kings. Okay, so on a military level, he followed Augustus' provisions that the former emperor had dictated formally before his death, and they were: do not extend the empire, consolidate its borders first. And the first campaigns were held in Germania, okay, aiming at restoring the prestige of Rome. The Germans were repeatedly defeated and rendered harmless for a long time. But Tiberius, after the catastrophe of Tutburg, you remember in 9 AD, 3 legions had been annihilated in the Tutburg forest, he decided not to try again to occupy the territories behind the Rhine. Germanicus, the guy here, he was Tiberius' grandson, as he was the son of his brother Drusus, who had Drusus had led operations in Germania under Augustus. And for this reason, he had called his son Germanicus. So Germanicus had been sent to lead the legions in Germania. He was also the nephew of Octavian's sister. And for this, Augustus, when adopting Tiberius, had forced him to adopt Germanicus as his successor. Here we can see the arch in orange in southeast France that was probably erected by between the years 20 and 25 AD to commemorate the victories of Germanicus. And the arch was later rededicated to Tiberius in 26 or 27 AD, and a dedication was added there. So Germanicus was very popular, and after he finished the campaigns in Germania and celebrated his triumph, Tiberius appointed him commander of the troops in Syria and sent him to the east to prepare the attack on the Parthians, who had driven the king of Armenia, an ally of the Romans, out of his kingdom. But people murmured. They murmured that Tiberius had exiled Germanicus out of jealousy. And while preparing the campaign, Germanicus died suddenly, perhaps from an illness in 19 AD. And he claimed, while dying, he claimed that he had been poisoned by the governor of the province of Syria, Piso. There had been several contrasts between the two. This is a picture of the widow of Germanicus taking his ashes in the port of Brundisium and taking them to Rome. When the funeral of Germanicus took place in Rome, Tiberius, who was a man of hidden emotions, let's say, he did not show his grief openly. And so more suspicions, more rumors, more murmurs that the emperor himself had ordered Piso to poison Germanicus because he was jealous of his popularity and wanted to eliminate the successor that Augustus had imposed on him. So Tiberius had a closed, reserved character. He did not have the charm of Augustus at all. And after the death of his popular nephew, he completely lost the favor of the masses. And this made him even more wary and ready to suspect intrigue against him. And already in these years, a typical phenomenon exploded in Rome that will characterize many phases of the history of the Roman Empire. It was whistleblowing. It was a consequence of the rivalries among senators. Someone said it was a kind of jungle law. Jealousies, accusations, complaints were very frequent. And in the Roman criminal system, there was no public prosecutor. Every citizen had a duty to report a crime if he became aware of it. And he could turn himself into an accuser. And a brilliant and bold accuser could gain many advantages from his initiative. For example, get rid of an enemy and then seize some of his property that was allowed by the law, or obtain the gratitude of the prince if he helped to foil a plot. So convictions were very frequent in those times and were often pronounced by senators themselves. But frequently they did not know exactly whether the prince or not was behind the whistleblower. And being uncertain, they preferred to condemn rather than expose themselves. Tiberius was certainly wrong in letting this plague grow, although in some cases he intervened. However, the sentences were numerous and some real plots were discovered. Meanwhile, in Tiberius' shade, the importance, the power of an infamous man grew. Lucius Aelius Seianus, the dreaded Prefectus Praetorio. He was a skilled, powerful, and unscrupulous man. A new actor now enters the scene, the famous Praetorian Guard. The rise of Seianus marks the political affirmation of the prefecture of the guard within the state organization, which will last until its fall, in the fall of the empire. And the Prefectus Praetorio is the commander of the Praetorian troops. Who are the Praetorians? Praetorians is a body of chosen soldiers, let's say elite soldiers, we say today. And they reside in Rome, and their main task is to protect the prince and his family. So the loyalty of these soldiers was obviously decisive for the lives of the emperors. In fact, they cared a lot about the Praetorians' satisfaction and well-being, and granted them gifts and privileges. Seianus' father, Strabo, was already the Praetorian prefect when Tiberius came to power in 14. But now his son was appointed co-prefect, and when his father was assigned to the governorate of Egypt in 15, Seianus became the only commander of the Praetorian Guard. And he immediately initiated a series of reforms to transform the Praetorians from bodyguards, simple bodyguards, to a powerful and important instrument of the principality and of himself. In 20 AD, the encampments of the Praetorians, which were located until then in different neighborhoods of Rome, they were gathered into a single camp, castrum, just outside the city limits. The number of brigades was increased from 9 to 12, and some soldiers were assigned to the direct protection of the imperial palace. And so, thanks to these changes, Seianus had formed a military elite of about 12,000 soldiers, all of them at his immediate disposal. It was also interesting to note that the change in the very concept of the Praetorian Guard. Before Seianus, the Praetorians were simply the soldiers who accompanied the emperor with the sole purpose of ensuring his personal protection. But now, Praetorians became a unit at the sole disposal of the emperor, whose role and strength were consciously exhibited, especially in military parades. This set a terrible precedent that will affect the life of the empire until its end. In 23, Drusus Minor, the direct son of Tiberius and first in the line of succession, he died. He was a fierce adversary of Seianus, and in his rise to power, Seianus had no alternative but to eliminate Drusus. The prefect, very cleverly, managed to seduce Drusus' wife, Livia, and convince her to kill her husband. The two began to slowly poison Drusus day after day, so that his death seemed to have occurred for natural causes. And Drusus' death affected the emperor very deeply, both personally and politically. Tiberius had increasingly focused on the succession of Drusus, but this blow was too hard to take. He became more and more introverted, and he left the administration of the state in the hands of Seianus more than ever. Seianus' power increased enormously, also because in 27 Tiberius decided to retire to his splendid palace in Capri. This is Villa Iovis. It's the Roman villa in Capri. And he would never return from there. It was really a strange and unpredictable decision, which will have many consequences. It is here you can see a view from the villa, and below here you can see the map. This is Marina Grande, where the ferries come, and this is where Villa Iovis is located in Capri. It is difficult to understand Tiberius' choices. Maybe they were caused by his temperament, his nerves. Tiberius was a gloomy man. Ancient authors tried to understand this decision. They tried to explain it in every way. Some said that Tiberius wanted to escape the influence of his mother, the terrible Livia, too authoritative, too intrusive. Others said that he had decided to retire to Capri because he was disgusted with himself, with his physique, his appearance. In fact, he had become very thin, curved, he was bald, and was disfigured by bad skin disease. And of course, it was also said that in Capri, he was now absolutely free to cultivate his sexual vices, and this is the legend of Tiberius the Cruel. Well, let me say that this is a constant of universal history. When a sovereign retires to a remote place, we can be sure that he does so to take out his lust. The real reason remains unclear, but this choice likely had to do with his nerves, and also keep in mind that he was already 70, a very old man for those times. So, back in Rome, with Tiberius far from the urbs and relying on him and being protected by the Praetorian Guard, Seianus became the arbiter of the events in Rome. And this went on for 5 years. His goal was to be designated by Tiberius as his successor. With this in mind, he had even asked for the hand of Tiberius' daughter-in-law, Livia, remember, Drusus' widow. So he would be admitted into the imperial family. It was a necessary condition for getting to the throne. So, to eliminate possible competitors, he skillfully exploited Tiberius' fears. He passed on news of plots against him and arranged for many members of Germanicus' family to be tried and imprisoned, exiled, or even sentenced to death. Even Agrippina, the elder, the widow of Germanicus, and 2 of her sons, Nero and Drusus, were arrested and exiled in 30 AD. And they died from starvation. Only Gaius, Germanicus' youngest son, who later will be known as Caligula, survived the Seianus purges, moving to Tiberius' villa in 31. Tiberius ruled the empire from Capri through frequent messages, but it was all too evident that all the power was in the hands of Seianus. And finally, in 31, his sister-in-law Antonia, Germanicus' mother, sent him a secret message to warn him. Be careful, Seianus is too powerful. He aspires openly to the throne. He is probably plotting against the emperor himself, against you. You have to stop him before it is too late. And in his perfect style, to eliminate Seianus, Tiberius resorted to deception. He sent Seianus a letter that Seianus himself would read in the Senate. He had been led to believe that it contained the investiture to Tribunica Potestas, one of the imperial powers. Instead, it contained his death sentence. Seianus was taken by surprise. He was arrested by the new prefect who had been appointed in the same hours by Tiberius. And soon after, he was convicted and executed. His body was left to the fury of the crowd that ripped him apart. The Senate, which had been always hostile to him, did not oppose the sentence. His sons and collaborators, and later all those who were accused of complicity were massacred. Numerous trials and death sentences followed against those who, right or wrong, were suspected of conspiring. But let me tell you that in the end, the victims of the repression belonged to the small circle of the individuals closest to power. And these events did not affect the development and the consolidation of the empire. In fact, at the date of the death of Tiberius, the state was in order and solid, financially, administratively, and militarily. In 37, Tiberius decided to leave Capri. And while leaving Capri, he died, perhaps a heart attack. In Rome, in the Senate, no one cried for him. And after the announcement of his death, the citizens of Rome celebrated the death of the alleged tyrant in the streets. But sadder times were ahead. And this is a picture of Caligula and his famous horse. Finally, the ancients, as I said, consider him negatively for his cruel hypocrisy. Some modern historians instead respected his inner torment and appreciated his good administration of the empire. Certainly, he is a controversial figure. He is nestled between the Republic and the new monarchical regime. So, in the last years of the Tiberius reign, around 30 AD, in a distant province called Palestine, a Jewish preacher, Yeshua, from the village of Nazareth, who had proclaimed himself the Messiah, that is, the anointed one, consecrated by the Lord of the Jews. He had drawn masses of believers and disciples around him. The priests of the Temple of Jerusalem, fearful of social unrest, handed him over to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, who tried him and had him executed by crucifixion. But his disciples did not cease to spread his creed. That trial and that sentence are the most important in the history of mankind. no legal action brought against a person is known to an equally large number of people. And the effects of the trial against Jesus on humanity and human history are just unmeasurable. But what was the role of the Romans in this event? We have here a map of Israel at the time of Jesus. So the Romans had intervened in Judea following the invitation, so to speak, of King Hyrcanus II, fighting for succession with his brother Aristobulus II. Pompey was then in Syria, where he had finally defeated Seleucus, the ruler of Syria. So in 63 BC, he proposed himself as a mediator and a peaceful man. And with this excuse, he entered Judea with his legions and conquered the capital of Judea, Jerusalem. Tacitus recalls Pompey's amazement when entering the temple. He found it absolutely empty, devoid of any image of divinity. This was incomprehensible to him. He was a fierce polytheist. And thus began the undisputed rule of the Romans over Judea. Aristobulus was exiled and Hyrcanus confirmed as an ally of Rome. But Pompey reduced the power of his dynasty, making Samaria independent and regrouping the cities, the Hellenistic cities of Transjordan into a confederation, the Decapolis. Deca is 10 and polis is city in Greek. In those years, the events of Palestine were closely linked to the ongoing developments in Roman politics, the death of Pompey and Caesar, the rise of Octavian. And the one who best interpreted and exploited this evolution was Herod, son of Antipater, governor of Idumea, and Idumea here, and then of Judea, an ally of Hyrcanus, who managed to obtain from the Senate in 37 BC the title of King of the Jews. Later, Antigonus, son of Aristobulus, thanks in part to the invasion of Palestine by the Parthians, he tried to overthrow Hyrcanus, but Herod, with the help of the Romans, killed Antigonus and defeated the Parthians. Herod then made an act of submission to Octavian, who reconfirmed him as the king of the Jews. Herod was called the Great and expanded his kingdom, and he built numerous palaces and fortresses through the country. He founded the city of Caesarea Marittima. And here, Caesarea Marittima. And in honor of the emperor. And this became the seat of the Roman prosecutor and of the imperial administration. His most important achievement, however, was the extension of the temple in Jerusalem, which he began in 19 BC and which was ended in 63 AD, shortly before its final destruction. And despite these works, he never won. He was never loved by the Jews, as he was of Idumean origin, and he was very fond of the Hellenistic culture. He sent two of his sons to study in Rome, and he gave a Greek imprint to the cities of his kingdom during his reign, so far as to build even pagan temples inside the city. And he died in 4 BC, and his death caused unrest, because the Jews did not want his children to reign. And for this reason, they sent a request to Augustus, but Augustus confirmed Herod's will which had divided the kingdom into three parts: Judea, Samaria, and Idumea, under Archelaus. The region northeast of Lake Galilee here to Philip, and Galilee and Perea to the Tetrarch Herod Antipas. So, according to the Gospel, the only historical testimony of the life of Jesus, and let me say that several scholars do not attribute historical value to the Gospels. Even they go so far as to deny the historical existence of Jesus. But personally, I believe that apart from any religious creed you might have, that Jesus really existed. So Jesus had already expressed his thoughts about the Romans and the foreign domination. In an episode reported by Mark, Matthew, and Luke, Jesus was mischievously questioned by some Pharisees, a sect of those times, whether or not it was right for the Jews to pay taxes to Rome. And he had told them to give him a coin. And he had asked whose image and inscriptions were on it. And to their answers, Caesar's. Jesus had pronounced the motto that later became famous: "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's." So he proclaimed that his message was not about earthly things such as taxes or the Romans. In general, Jesus' message contained, however, strong values strongly in contrast with Rome and its power. The Roman religion was polytheistic. The Romans worshipped the emperor like a god. For the Roman thought the use of force and violence was normal and accepted. Roman society was fundamentally and deeply unbalanced because it was based on discrimination and the exclusion of slaves and women in particular. Jesus instead preached faith in one God, the Jewish God. To strength and violence, he opposed universal love and forgiveness. He preached the equality of all men before God, regardless of gender and social condition. Thus, although he did not speak against the Romans, his message was opposed to the very essence of their domination and social organization. The Romans were involved in the trial of Jesus at a later time. Jesus was transferred by the Jewish guards to the Praetorium, the paved courtyard. Here is the temple, and this is the fortress Antonia, where the governor stayed when he was in Jerusalem. And the Praetorium is the paved courtyard inside the fortress. And during the year, as I said before, Roman prefects resided in Caesarea Maritima. And Pontius Pilate came he was the prefect of Judea, and he came to Jerusalem for the Jewish festivities to represent the Roman power and counter any possible violent act against Rome and its allies. And he resided in the fortress Antonia. As a prefect in an occupied territory, Pilate has a legal duty to review all cases and all evidence in capital crimes. Here, I didn't find a portrait of the real Pilate, so I put here the portrait made by in three very famous movies. On the right, we have Pilate in Jesus Christ Superstar, Brian Dennehy, and in the center we have Pilate in Jesus of Nazareth. He's the Oscar winner Steiger, and on the left we have the pilot of Mel Gibson's the Passion. So Pontius Pilate had been suggested to Tiberius by Seianus, the Praetorian prefect, and after the end of the long term of the prosecutor, the former prosecutor, Valerius Gratus, the Emperor Tiberius needed an inflexible man to rule that province, a dangerous land inhabited by poor, proud, and difficult people who thought that they were the people elected by the god to rule the world, and in the eyes of the Romans believed in a religion full of superstitions. Tiberius was also very concerned about Judea itself because, together with Syria, Judea was the first barrier against a possible attack by the Parthians, the eternal enemies of Rome. And Pilate was actually very inflexible. A few years later, the philosopher Philo of Alexandria wrote about him that he had not shown the slightest interest in his subjects, their religion or their traditions. He was intransigent, he was ruthless, he was angry and grumpy. And Philo added that many of his actions were insults to the people, acts of robbery and violence. And this contrasts a little bit with what is written in the Gospels. People complained about the constant harassment, the execution of prisoners without conviction or trial, and his infinite and inhuman cruelty. For example, one of his first acts was an open provocation. He knew that Jewish law forbade human representations, particularly those of the Roman emperors. And the emperor proclaimed himself God, and thus he offended Giulia. But Pilate thought that tolerance was a demonstration of weakness. So he ordered his soldiers to bring the insignia with the emperor's effigy within the city, and to do it at night to put the Jews with a fait accompli. And the next morning, seeing the banners hanging on the walls of the prefect's residence, the population rose. But Pilate, contemptuous, had already left for Caesarea, the capital, but the Jews did not give up, and many traveled the 120 kilometers to Caesarea to express their indignation in front of him. They demanded respect for their traditions, and they asked that imperial banners and images be transferred outside the holy city. Pilate was impassive, ignored them. But on the 6th day of protest, he had them gathered in the stadium. And he ordered a cohort, about 500 men, to hide in the meanderings of the building. And amid the furious cries of the crowd, the prefect declared that the insignia would remain in place as a symbol of the imperial power. And then, when he had enough of the protests, he ordered the soldiers to line up with the swords unsheathed in the arena and surround the Jews. But they didn't let themselves be intimidated. They threw themselves to the ground and uncovered their necks, as if inviting the soldiers to kill them. And in the meantime, they shouted they preferred to die rather than see their laws violated with such insolence. Pilate was forced to give in this time. So the procedure followed by Pilate against Jesus was a cognitio extra ordinem. It was used in provincial areas, in difficult provinces. Here, the presence of the real court was not necessary. The solution adopted by the high priests was to accuse Jesus of a crime that interfered with the Roman interests. The self-proclamation as the king of the Jews, the betrayal towards Caesar and Rome, was decisively very serious. But although the affirmation of real Jesus royalty represented a crime of lèse majesty, and it involved the death sentence, Pilate found Jesus not guilty. And at first, he did not condemn him. Here we can see the Roman soldiers getting into Jerusalem many years later in 70 AD and seizing the city and raiding the temple. So, indeed, finding that he was a Galilean, Pilate sent him to Herod Antipas, Herod's the great son, who had the jurisdiction over Galilee, the region where Jesus had begun his activity. And once again, I didn't find any portraits of Herod Antipas, so I put here the three characters of the same movies as before. So on the right we have the Herod of Jesus Christ Superstar. In the center we have the Herod of the Passion, and on the left we have the great Christopher Plummer, the Herod of Jesus of Nazareth. But Herod Antipas found no valid reason to condemn Jesus, and he sent him back to Pilate. So the governor, having failed this experiment, resorted to the application of the so-called Easter privilege. In each Easter time, the prefect could release a prisoner chosen by the people. The crowd, instead of Jesus, chose a common criminal, Barabbas. In the end, why did Pilate agree to the crowd's request to crucify Jesus? Most likely the relations with the population were so compromised that Pilate preferred to sacrifice Jesus rather than risk an insurrection because of him. Because of one of the many prophets that occasionally popped up on that unfortunate and silly land. His main absolute task was to safeguard public order and preserve the emperor's authority. So, this is the flagellazione di Pietro della Francesca, which was painted in around 1450 and is at the Galleria Nazionale delle Marche in Urbino. And according to Roman law, Jesus was immediately sentenced and to death. First, however, he was handed to the Roman garrison over to be scourged. And it was a punishment sadly practiced by all the peoples of antiquity, but the Romans used not a simple whip, but a flagrum, a stringed whip with pieces of bone and metal. Finally, after the torture ended, in his poor clothes, Jesus was escorted to Mount Golgotha by some Roman soldiers. On his way to the place of the execution, outside the city walls, the condemned for heinous crimes, as a sign of great shame, was loaded with the patibulum, a beam that he carried transversely on his shoulders, while the vertical pole was already stuck in the ground. According to Roman law, the crucifixion was collective and exemplary. Jesus was not executed alone, but together with the two other criminals, as if he had committed a common crime. The table above the cross, which had to report the reason for the sentence, it read, Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judeorum, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The earthly life of Jesus ended, and Christianity began. It would undermine the foundation, the very foundation of the Roman state. Okay, that's all for tonight. It's 10:11 p.m. here, and I thank you all for your attention, for following us. I hope that you were able to follow it, and you didn't have any problems, any connection. I see that we may have a connection problem, but I hope that you were able to follow it. And I thank you very much for everything. And please follow us next 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, we will have the story of Caligula and the Emperor Claudius. And in the meantime, we are publishing our episodes, Italy, an Extraordinary History, our podcast. Please, if you want to download it, we are telling these tales once again, and so that you can enjoy them anywhere, anytime. So thank you very much. Greetings for Marcello. Happy Easter to Christians, and happy Easter to everybody. And I'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao. Arrivederci. Ciao.